Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this exclusive session on the decade of India's growth and prosperity, the beginning. It is indeed, ladies and gentlemen, India's decade of growth and prosperity, and to talk to us this morning about the beginning, we have no less a person than Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. May I request Dr. Anant Nageswaran to please join us on the dais. We also have with us Mr. Raman Chopra, Joint Secretary, TPL, to Central Board of Direct Taxes, Ministry of Finance, Government of India with us. May I call upon Mr. Chopra to join us on the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us one of the reputed industry faces from Eastern India and all over India, who is also one of the former presidents of Bharat Chamber of Commerce. May I call upon Mr. Hari Mohan Bangarji, a former president of Bharat Chamber, to join us on the dais. I would request Mr. Rajkumar Agarwal, Vice President, Bharat Chamber of Commerce, to join us on the dais. Last but not the least, a person who's been behind this program this morning, may I call Mr. Rishi Bagri, Chairman, Program Subcommittee of the Chamber, to join us on the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, let us start this very positive morning with flowers. May I request Mr. Hari Mohan Bangar to present a bouquet of flowers on all your behalf to Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor. May we have a round of applause, please. I would request Mr. Rajkumar Agarwal, Vice President, Bharat Chamber of Commerce, to extend a warm welcome with a bouquet of flowers to Mr. Raman Chopra, Joint Secretary, Central Board of Direct Taxes, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. We would be now starting the session with a welcome address by Mr. Rajkumar Agarwal, Vice President of the Chamber.
Good morning, friends. Dr. Nageswaran, Shri Chopra, Shri Bangar, members of the Chamber, guests and friends. I welcome you all to this exclusive session entitled The Decade of India's Growth and Prosperity, the Beginning, organized by our Chamber this morning. On behalf of our members and my own, I have immense pleasure to extend a very warm and hearty welcome to our guest-in-chief, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Sir, we are grateful to you for kindly sparing some of your valuable time to address us. It is a matter of pride to us that last year the Chamber had the privilege of being addressed by Dr. Nageswaran immediately after his appointment as the Chief Economic Advisor. I would now like to extend a very warm and hearty welcome to our guest of honor, Sri Raman Chopra, IRS Joint Secretary, Central Board of Direct Taxes, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Sir, you would be pleased to know that the Chamber has a very active subcommittee on direct and indirect taxation. We have been therefore submitting our views on the fiscal policies to the government at the center and our state regularly. I would now like to take this opportunity to extend a very special welcome to Sri H.M. Bangar, one of our illustrious former presidents of the Chamber and Chairman Sri Cement Limited to our midst. We are grateful to Sri Bangar for his support in organizing today's event. He has kindly agreed to introduce the theme of this session. I would therefore briefly make a few observations. At this time, several economies of the world are facing headwinds. They are suffering from inflation, recession, and other economic crises. In contrast, we are fortunate that based on forward-looking policies, the Indian economy has overcome the global economic stresses. We are now at the beginning of another era of economic growth and prosperity. In this regard, very recently, Nomura has released a report where it has been evidently outlined that India is set to register a CAGR of around 6.6% between 2023-24 and 2030-31, the strongest growth phase since 2010-11. So far, China has seen a prolonged phase of economic boom over the last few decades. It is now our time to show the world our capabilities in various sectors of our economy. A number of factors have contributed to our economic prosperity. The most important are the focus on reforms, simplification of tax administration, schemes like PLI and friendshoring, to name a few. The most important contributor is, however, the priority on infrastructure development. The Government of India has made very high allocations in this sector since the inception of COVID. A record high of rupees 10 lakh crores towards capital expenditure has been announced in the central budget for 23-24. Capital expenditure has also been ramped up to 3.3% of GDP from a pre-pandemic average of 1.7%. Execution of projects on time has considerably improved, but there are still some areas of concern. The two railway freight corridors are such examples. As per the Government of India's flash report for April 23, out of the 1,605 projects, 800 have been delayed and 132 have been over-delayed. The average time overrun in these 800 delayed projects was about 37 months. The total original cost of implementation of these 1,605 projects was rupees 22,85,674 crores, while the cost overrun is expected to be rupees 4,64,917 crores. We would therefore request Dr. Nageshwaran to consider the policy initiatives that would address the existing obstacles in infrastructure creation. Recently, the RBI has reported that the Indian economy is slowly but surely recovering from the impact of pandemic and the economic fallout of the war in Ukraine. The real GDP growth in the first quarter of the current fiscal has been projected at 7.8%. However, considering that our GDP growth rate is likely to settle around 7% range for the next few years, it will take us 8 years to touch the old pre-COVID GDP glide path. In addition to this, the manufacturing sector is growing at a post-COVID rate of 6.1%. It has been estimated that if the current rate of recovery continues, then by 2030-31, the gap between the actual and potential GVA in manufacturing will widen to nearly 2.5 lakh crores. In this context, I would request Dr. Nageshwaran to elucidate on the current and future prospects of growth in the manufacturing sector and the role that it is expected to play in India's existing ensuing growth and prosperity. The total gross collection of GST for 2022-23 is reported at rupees 8.10 lakh crores, which is about 22% higher than the collection in the previous year. Sri Chopra's department has devised the policies to earn this record revenue. Now these collections have to be used to fuel the weaker sectors of our economy. I would request Sri Chopra to share his thoughts on plowing back a part of the revenue to boost growth in these weaker sectors. With these words, I would conclude my address and request Sri Bangar to present the theme of the session. Thank you.
Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Sri Raman Chopra, Joint Secretary, CBDT, Ministry of Finance. Sri Rajkumar Agarwal, Vice President of Bharat Chamber of Commerce. Respected members of the media, my fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you. It is a great honor and privilege for me to be here today. The theme for today is both exciting and heartwarming. When I first heard of the theme, I was curious and wanted to read the theme several times, the decade of the India's growth and prosperity, the beginning. The theme did not have a question mark at the end. It reaffirmed what I had in mind, and I am so convinced about, there is no ambivalence or question to the fact that it is indeed India's decade of growth and prosperity. And we are indeed on the right track. Our direction, our speed, our innovations, our path, our technology, and our goals are now leading the global outlook on how India is rapidly progressing to occupy a world position that is so truly it deserves. Why would be I so confident? The current global standing of Indian economy shows that post-COVID, every economy globally is talking of a slow recovery. The shock hit every economy, but within 1 year post-lockdown, India is one of the fastest growing large economies. This wouldn't have been possible without strong fundamentals laid out by this government, so strongly led by our PM. Our Honorable PM had his team of honorable ministers. Our records are worth emulating by many. Mutual funds investment in India has reached to rupees 42 lakh crores in 2023. Our digital transaction is clocking 76% of GDP, something unheard of 10 years back. We are building at a pace that is overwhelming. 53,700 kilometers of highways and 28,100 kilometers of railway tracks. GST collections have climbed to 18 lakh crores, and we are witnessing cement demand growth at a pace that was unheard of in the past decade. Last week, the RBI reiterated that we would grow at around 6.5%. This is at a time when several countries are seeking a risk of sharp recession. A few days back, Morgan Stanley in its report highlighted that India has indeed transformed in less than a decade. Moreover, it reasons out that India will emerge as a key driver for Asia and global growth. Sri Nageswaranji, today's theme reminded me of your economics, just a bit. Sri Nageswaranji, today's theme reminded me of your economic survey of this year. When I read your survey, my attention was drawn to the chapter titled India's Medium-Term Growth Outlook with Optimism and Hope. In this, you highlight that how the government during the period of 14 to 22 brought out several changes that strengthened the economy's fundamentals and brought about efficiency. Among others, the underlying emphasis was that the goal of the government are in co-partnership with the private sector. This is quite heartwarming. Speaking as a citizen and from the private sector industry, it was heartening to note that government saw us a critical partner of the country's future. With vision and leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, Sri Modi ji, this belief would get, borrowing a term from the industry I come from, rock-like cement. The encouragement to the private sector through programs such as Startup India, Make in India, or for that matter, the recent PLI scheme will create foundations of a leader country. The results are showing. I have always believed in the animal spirit of the India's entrepreneurship. It was only a question of unleashing them. Very proud to see that today we have 100 unicorns valued at over $300 billion. And when you are, or someone of your caliber, pens the future survey, would retain the chapter, but with a title which doesn't talk of optimism and hope, but would more emphatically say, India leads global economy. We at Sri Cement have believed in the India's story, which is why we have been the fastest growing cement company in the country. We have created new plants, new opportunities for employment, and economic prosperity for our citizens. In my view, every company should grow not only by acquisition, but also by building new plans and business to create new roads for GDP improvements. You will be glad to know that our plans for future is clear, that we should build few plants every year. In last 2 years, we have built plants in Purulia in West Bengal, as well as Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan. We are determined to retain our position as the greenest cement company in the world. Very happy to share that our green power share now stands at 55%. We will do more to ensure that our actions are fully aligned to the ambitions of India, so well described by our Honorable Prime Minister. Our belief in the country is strong, and we are determined to become the most preferred partner in the journey called a decade of India's growth and prosperity, the beginning. This wouldn't have been possible without the vision and optimism provided by the government and the leadership of Narendra Modi ji. He is like a beacon guiding the country to a harbor in a tempest. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you will agree that the optimism about next decade in India is not mine alone. Let every citizen participate in this journey and create a country that is indeed an example and an inspiration to many. Our journey has begun. As we progress towards coming years, we need to remain alert. World is changing as much as India is changing. It's just not the change, but the velocity of change that is encompassing all walks of life. We need for a wide range of policy interventions and actions to enable and support this high velocity change. The world is no longer about consistency and stability of policies only. It's about accelerated, reasonable, and precise policy response to the mega issues. Our future policies should address technology, innovations, speed, and most importantly, how as a country we can become master in execution. Execution of innovations, regulations, management, infrastructure management, and citizen upliftment as we move towards a lower carbon pathway. Industries will also need policy and fiscal support to grow, innovate, and most importantly, invest in equipment and facilities that may not be financially viable today, but could pave the road for India's future. As an example, creating world-class manufacturing will require significant investment in technology, some of which come at a very steep cost. Similarly, the road to lower carbon would require significant investment, and without policy support, it may not be viable. I am confident that under the able leadership of Honorable Prime Minister and our Honorable Finance Minister, we will see fast and effective policy response to these topics as we have seen in the past. I would like to state that the rest of the world has much to gain from a more prosperous, confident, and powerful India. In addition to being the world's most populous country, India is also the largest democracy, and its voice will only grow in importance as its economy shines. At the end, I would again like to thank Bharat Chamber of Commerce to organize this executive session, the decade of India's growth and prosperity, the beginning. I would request now Sri Chopra ji to share his vision and plans for India and building for the future. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. When I read the topic, growth and prosperity, the only thing which came to my mind was prosperity has a hidden concept of happiness embedded in it. So both are a result of development, but prosperity is more linked to an inherent feeling of happiness in human beings. And when the government has this plan and policy of focusing on growth as well as prosperity, that means it means well for its people. On the development side, development is principally driven by government policy, and policy is the makers of the policy and the takers of the policy. Both interact, which results in a set of principles which result in development. And government policy focuses on the expenditure side and the revenue side. On the revenue side, the basic policy of the government should be, and it has always been, to improve revenue collection. But in the last 8 years or so, there is another focus which the government has already taken, and that is ease of doing business. That makes the task of revenue policies even more difficult. On one side, I have to improve revenue collection. On the second side, I have to see it does not hamper in any manner ease of doing business. And I must say, and you may agree with me on that the government has been absolutely successful in this. You see the revenue collections, they've grown extremely well. We've had the highest levels of buoyancy in 21-22 over the last decade. Buoyancy means that revenue collections have grown more than the growth in the GDP. That is what I mean by buoyancy. So once revenue collections have been good, I would just like to highlight that how do they interface with ease of doing business. The basic cornerstone of the government policy in the last 8 to 10 years has been non-intrusive voluntary compliance. By non-intrusive voluntary compliance, I mean that government is encouraging voluntary compliance from the taxpayer itself. How do I reach that position? That the taxpayer himself comes forth and pays his adequate tax. Third party reporting, as we see, has increased a lot in the last 8 years. A lot of information is being gathered, not from the taxpayer, but from third parties. And that information was lying with us. Originally, you were able to see only your 26 AS and the TDS deducted. Over the last 3 years, you would see that the information is being absolutely shared with you in AIS. The entire information which is available with the government is being shared with you. I come back again to the basic policy of non-intrusive voluntary compliance. That once the information is available with you, available with us, it promotes the basic policy of voluntary compliance. It has been followed up further by showing you that information, then telling you that this information is there by an active means. We also introduced the concept of an updated return last year. As we were discussing yesterday, that small mistakes, small omissions should not lead to consequences which were never intended, either from the government side or from the taxpayer side. So that updated return concept was simply to reduce litigation, to increase voluntary compliance. You come forth, pay tax, share whatever you want. And that has resulted in enormous growths in revenues throughout, despite the fact that fundamentally the rates of tax have been reduced substantially. We started from 30% in 2014 and we reduced it to 22%, and for new manufacturing we have reduced it to 15%. If you see corporate taxes, 15% is perhaps the lowest among developing countries. So despite the reduction in rates of tax, the improvement in revenues is due to voluntary compliance. And voluntary compliance has been the focus of the government and has resulted from sharing of information, gathering of information and sharing of information. And once government has that revenue pool, that money is in hand, that it has to expend judiciously. And on the expenditure side, I must say government has really done well on the expenditure side. Sir will share his presentation and actually speak on that why has this process succeeded and how it will succeed further. I will not take too much more time. I will just say that the present policy of the government to encourage voluntary compliance will carry on. We do not intend to put any burden on ease of doing business. And it has not been there, never been there. And the sensitivity of the government towards stakeholder inputs is immense. Whatever inputs are coming, they are being immediately factored into in the form of policy. And that is why the policy is showing results. That's about it. I will request Sir to take up. Thank you.
there a small table to keep the water? Because this is a bit shaky. Huh. Yeah, that's good. I understand, no problem. Thank you very much. Shri Banga, Shri Rajkumar Agarwal ji, my colleague Raman Chopra, Ms. Keka Sharma, present and former office bearers of the Bharat Chamber of Commerce, distinguished industrialists, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and honor to be here, to be invited to speak to this august institution, which is more than 130 years old, in the service of industry, in the service of the nation, and in the service of the society. I was very glad that my first interaction with an outside organization after becoming the Chief Economic Advisor was with the Bharat Chamber of Commerce. It was a virtual session, and I'm glad to be physically present here. And while the journey from the airport last evening to the hotel took more than 95 minutes because of the rain, I was told when I came here that we brought welcome showers with us from Delhi, so I would rather take that compliment and coincidence, even though we have nothing to do with it. So now with that, I would request the organization to load my slides so that I can begin. Thank you very much. So the purpose of my presentation is to share with you not only the good news story of India's economic performance post-pandemic, including during the pandemic, but also to share with you and reassure you that we are aware of the responsibility that we need to carry this forward for the next 25-30 years. And we are also aware of the tasks and priorities that need to be addressed to be able to carry this performance over the next quarter century, the Amrit Kal period. So I will be talking to you on these 6 broad topics. What do the current growth figures tell you? And go into individual sector performances. And what gives us the satisfaction about the medium term, which is the balance sheet strength of the banking, non-banking and corporate sectors. How is the government contributing from its fiscal performance, budget management? And then along with the balance sheet effect, we are also benefiting from the effect of India's digital transformation. And what is the outlook along with the challenges which we are in a position to convert into opportunities for the medium term? Okay. First of all, it is a very heartening achievement for the government and for the economy, especially its efforts of people like you, more than the government, that gave us the 7.2% real GDP growth in FY23, following the 9.1% in FY22. In fact, some of you may know that the India's GDP growth estimates are presented 6 times. The final estimate for FY23 will actually be with us in January, February 2026. And my expectation and belief is that when the final number for FY23 is frozen in February 26, the number will be more than 7.2%. So this, in my opinion, is just the first reliable estimate of the GDP growth, and as more and more data become available, further revisions will be towards even more upside for 7.2%, because the momentum that the economy is carrying with it is quite strong. What you see on the left side is, of course, quarter by quarter breakdown, there were a lot of concerns when the third quarter numbers were on the lower side, 4.5% in October, December 2022. But then at the time, I told members of the media that this was due to the previous year's revisions being on the higher side, so the base effect depressed the third quarter growth, and also because of the impact of the oil price increase in April to June quarter, and then the interest rate increases, etc. But the underlying momentum of the economy was strong, and you would see that in the fourth quarter, which is exactly what I shared with the media. And I personally quite gratified to note that that expectation or belief was borne out when the fourth quarter numbers came out. And if you look at many other countries, we have provided a comparison on the right side. In the fourth quarter, India's GDP growth numbers were higher than several leading nations, developing and developed. Okay. Now, if we break down the performance, we start with the services, with the various sectors. On the top left, you see agriculture steadily growing at around 4%. Growth rate in the industrial sector has slowed down, but it is coming from a high base. And more importantly, it reflects the temporary factors that we witnessed last year: oil price, interest rates, and concerns about the impact of war on the economy, etc. But they are all growing at very steady 4 to 6%. And if you look at the export performance, both goods and services is more than 23% of GDP. Private consumption as a share of GDP is at a 16-year high. We will talk about that later in granular detail. And more importantly, people like you are investing, beginning to invest, which creates employment and income gains for the population. The capital formation ratio as a percentage of GDP is at 34, highest in 8 years, and I do expect it to continue to increase going into mid to high 30s in the remainder of this decade. And we will explain the reasons as to why we have this optimism about capital formation picking up. First, we talk about private consumption. What you see is that the pandemic brought down the trend from the red line to the black line. But the black line now has caught up with the trend. It is now almost as though the pandemic did not happen, hurting consumption of households. The catch-up has been swift, of course, mainly driven by urban consumption. But when we say that rural consumption is lagging behind, we should also remember that the classification of what constitutes rural India and what constitutes urban India keeps changing. What might have been considered as rural sometime in the past are now being classified as urban. So in some sense, this distinction between urban and rural consumption being somewhat different is also artificially induced because we reclassify many locations and centers from rural to urban. So the truth is, yes, some pockets of consumption are not growing as strongly as other pockets of consumption, but overall in the aggregate, consumption growth in the economy has caught up with the long-term trend, which means that the pandemic-induced consumption slowdown is now a thing of the past. Has the economy carried this momentum forward into the current financial year? The answer is unambiguously yes. You see on the right side, 23-24, almost all the indicators are in strong green or light green. Maybe some are in shades of yellow, such as the non-oil exports, etc. But overall, the important thing to note, with 2 months behind us in FY24, the economy still carries a strong momentum, and that augurs well for our growth to be another respectable 6.5% this year, as well as good as the previous year's numbers. We now go into more granular confirmation of what we have been sharing with you on a headline basis. The agricultural sector, if you look at the record food grain production, the estimates are steadily improving for 22-23 on the top left. Now, given we have concerns about the monsoon El Nino effect, it is good to know that the storage in the reservoirs compared to 10-year average is running at about 24% nationally above the 10-year average. So we have more than 1.2 times the last 10 years average storage in reservoirs. There is adequate availability of seeds for Kharif sowing, and wheat stock with the government is high enough to meet temporary market fluctuations in prices and shortfall. And if you look at the tractor sales, it is running at levels well above the tractor sales pre-pandemic. And fertilizer stocks are also very comfortable. So, notwithstanding the current genuine concerns and question marks we have about El Nino effect, let us remember one thing. Most drought years in India were El Nino years, but not all El Nino years become drought years. That is something very important to remember, the distinction between the two. So an El Nino does not necessarily mean it will be a drought or a deficient monsoon. Okay? Okay. Now, moving on from the agriculture to the secondary sector, industry, Purchasing Managers Index, which shows that industries are procuring raw materials and other inputs, and that is now 30-month continuous expansion, because the line 50 constitutes the difference between expansion and contraction. And on the right top, you might see that the index of industrial production and core industry production, you may appear that the data are showing very low growth. That is simply because of the scale effect. Because post-pandemic in 21-22, there was a catch-up effect. The numbers are coming from 40% and 30%, but we are now still growing at a healthy high single-digit rate, as you see on the right top. Capacity utilization, I have distinguished industrialists sitting here. Most of you are telling me that you are expanding capacity quite vigorously because the current state of demand in the economy is strong enough that capacity utilization is crossing levels where you have to either augment existing capacity in existing plants or set up greenfield investments. And that is what is going to create a virtuous cycle of employment growth and income growth. And a pickup in residential and non-residential construction activity is validated by the data on steel production and cement production, index of cement production, because ultimately when the construction sector takes off, it draws workers from rural India into urban centers, and they in turn send income transfers back to their home villages, which boosts rural consumption. That cycle is also beginning to unfold as we speak. So moving on from agriculture industry to services, the Purchasing Managers Index of the services sector is also growing very strongly at 62 points, well above the threshold of 50. Rail freight traffic, and you look at the hospitality industry on the bottom left. In fact, one of the Hotel Industry Association members told me last week in Delhi that pre-pandemic, the hospitality industry employed 4 crore people. During the pandemic, that number came down to 2.9 crores. Post-pandemic, the number has grown to 4.5 crores, exceeding the pre-pandemic level of 4 crores in the hospitality industry. And foreign tourist arrivals are coming back to the pre-pandemic average as well. Now, this is the chart that I wanted to show you. Rural demand in the financial year 23, in the first 3 quarters, was declining, but in the fourth quarter you see a small blip on the positive side, the red bar, and I am told by some of the FMCG companies that rural demand is beginning to turn around, and they see this momentum continuing in April and May as well. And you can see that in the rural wage growth data on top right, it is now beginning to catch up, especially both agri wages and non-agri wages. And then the two-wheeler and three-wheeler sales picked up after a slight languishing in February and March. It picked up in April as well. So these are all very promising early signs that after a period of sluggish growth, rural demand is beginning to pick up. An increase in the MSP announced last week, minimum support prices and the Manrega demand. And as I mentioned earlier, the construction sector growth will contribute to income generation in rural India. And we are confident, therefore, that the consumption blip you see in the fourth quarter, the small red bar above zero, will actually gather strength as we go into the current financial year. External sector, we have seen agriculture, industry and services and rural India, and we also see external sector. Export growth, in terms of goods, it was a difficult year because global economy was slowing, affected by oil price, affected by higher interest rates and the war in Ukraine, etc. But services sector growth was very strong, and naturally, as oil prices came down towards the second half of last financial year, the trade deficit actually became smaller, it improved. So today we have a comfortable situation on the external front compared to the fears and concerns we had at the beginning of the last financial year. The current account deficit, which means our dependence on foreign funding, is lower in FY24. The current account deficit is going to be around 2% or even slightly less, 2% of GDP or less. Service sector trade is in big surplus. Of course, the advent of artificial intelligence gives us both opportunities and threats to manage, to maintain service sector exports. We need to be vigilant, but today the service sector is not just about software. It is also about various other value-added services such as risk management, compliance, etc. All of the accounting, all of them being driven out of India through global capability centers, GCCs. So India's service sector growth is not just a story of IT and IT-enabled services. Foreign portfolio investors are re-entering India after the first 6 months of the last financial year when they were somewhat cautious. They now begin to appreciate the macroeconomic stability, corporate profitability, and the overall growth. That is why FII investments into Indian markets is been steadily rising in the current calendar year. And foreign exchange reserves, after dipping again in the first half of FY23, is now coming closer to $600 billion. And if we include the forward cover positions, it's already above $600 billion, covering more than 10 months of imports. And more importantly, coming to inflation management, compared to the historical patterns we have seen when India used to suffer from high inflation after 3 to 4 years of growth, we have always had to therefore feel satisfied with 3 or 4 years of growth before inflation picks up, current account deficit widens, central bank raises interest rates, the currency collapses. Such overheating is now appearing to be a thing of the past. In this cycle, India's inflation peaked at 7.8%, the smallest deviation from the target of 2 to 6% range we have. And therefore, RBI's interest rates are one of the lowest compared to other countries in the world. We didn't have to over-tighten because other countries splurged too much of fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus during the pandemic. We did not overspend during the pandemic. Our spending was targeted. Our interest rate and monetary support was targeted, and the government took care of the food and other essential item spending for the population. So therefore, not only because of our fiscal situation, but also because of our conviction that we need to make sure that in the cause of protecting the vulnerable segments of the population, we did not sacrifice the medium-term and long-term fiscal health. So we effectively utilized the fiscal resources compared to other countries. So did the central bank. And that is the reason today we see India's interest rate increase last 12 months is much lower than other countries. And also the inflation overshoot was much smaller than in other countries. Why are we positive about medium term as well? So what I shared with you so far is explaining the performance of 22-23 and setting the context for 23-24, which is very positive. But looking beyond FY24, how do we see the economy performing? And there, I would say, the prospects are as good as they are for FY24. for one important reason. The second one comes later. The first reason I am positive about 24 and beyond is because last decade, the Indian corporate sector, banking sector, non-financial sector were reducing their debt, reducing their exposures, and making their balance sheets leaner and meaner and stronger. So we are now ready to expand again. Companies are willing to invest, banks are willing to lend. Therefore, you see in the second decade, debt ratios came down. Now they are ready to expand. And that means capital investments will happen, creating employment and income growth. So the strong balance sheets of the banking system and the corporate system is the most important reason for us to be confident about investments taking place this decade. And you can see in this charts on both sides, the banking sector's non-performing assets are lower and capital adequacy is more than double the minimum requirement across private sector and public sector banks on the right side. While the minimum requirement is 9% of the risk-weighted assets, the actual capital ratios are almost double in several cases. So banks are adequately capitalized to be able to lend as the economy continues to grow and demands more credit. And you can see that in the actual data. Credit growth to agriculture, industry, services, and personal loans growing at 16%, and credit growth to MSME sector is growing at 12% after catching up very strongly in FY23. It is still growing at a very healthy double-digit levels. So, investment activity on the back of strong balance sheets and credit growth, you can see Indian businesses are importing capital goods more than consumption goods. Capital goods imports picking up is a healthy sign. On the bottom left, you can see capital goods production index and infrastructure goods production index are rising. On the right side, you can see in FY23, most sectors of the economy in the private sector actually increased their capex spending. As I mentioned earlier about hospitality, that saw the highest growth in capital investment, but several other sectors also very strong growth in capital investments. And the government on its part is going to continue to help with its own fiscal management, keeping interest rates steady and stable at 7%. And in fact, our aim is to bring down the fiscal deficit to 4.5% from the current 5.9, 4.5 by FY26, so that our cost of capital for the government will come down, translating into lower interest rates for you as well. And the way we are doing it is to improve the quality of government spending. 6 years ago, the ratio between revenue and capital expenditure was 88 to 12. Revenue was 88%, capital expenditure was 12%. Now, revenue expenditure is 78%, capital expenditure is 22% of the government budget. And you can see that on the right side, 3 times increase in government's capital expenditure. And this is backed up by research. Capital expenditure provides the highest bang for the buck, highest multiplier. 1 rupee spent on capital expenditure brings you 3 rupees of growth and employment generation compared to either tax cuts or one-off subsidies given to the people, because this generates sustainable growth both for the economy and for employment and households. And you can see that in the tax revenue because of the emphasis on fiscal management, emphasis on technology, emphasis on revenue monitoring and collections, but also because of better economic activity and friendlier tax administration, as my colleague Mr. Raman Chopra pointed out in his initial remarks. We are now able to see a non-intrusive and non-invasive ways of sustaining tax growth so that we can continue to spend in the areas where the government has to spend, such as welfare payments for low-income people, spending on health and education, infrastructure, etc. And the GST collections have been stepping up from about 1 lakh crores to an average of 1.6 to 1.7 lakh crores per month now. And the other important reason, earlier I mentioned to you that one reason for my optimism is the balance sheet strength in the corporate sector. and in the banking sector. The second reason for my optimism about the medium term is India's digital transformation. We all know about using our QR codes and phones to make payments. Wallet becomes unnecessary. Your phone is your phone as well as a wallet these days. And that is not just about payment convenience. We create digital footprints. Even the smallest vendor, even the smallest micro firm now today has a digital track record to show. That gives them financial access, that gives them market access, that brings them into the formal economy, and they can avail of various facilities, government schemes and programs. So in fact, The Economist magazine wrote in January that if you come to India a few years from now, you are unlikely to see pavement vendors and street vendors because they all would have become grown and prosperous and become formal enterprises. So the digitization of the economy is not about convenience alone. It's about efficiency, productivity, formalization, and financial inclusion. So between the corporate sector's balance sheet, capital investments, which was sluggish last decade because of balance sheet issues, because of that picking up, and because of digital transformation, India's average growth, which was estimated to be 6% by World Bank, IMF, etc., we believe that these two additional factors will contribute anywhere between 0.5 to 0.8% to our trend growth, taking it closer to 7% rather than 6%. So India's digital transformation, which is even better than countries with much higher per capita income, is actually binding the nation into a more efficient and formal economic machinery. And that is a transformation. Luckily for us, it has just begun. Much more remains to happen, such as open network digital commerce, which provides the global marketplace even for the smallest enterprise, the Udyam portal for MSMEs, the e-Shram portal for informal workers so that they can get welfare benefits, the PM Swanidhi scheme for street vendor loans for them to grow and become formal, account aggregator, which means all of us can, with the click of a button on authorization, allow our own information to pass between different financial institutions so that you can avail of various financial products and facilities. All these things are raising the performance of the economy, efficiency, but also our aspirations. And as a result of these improvements, ultimately what matters to people not is all these statistics, but what matters to them is their income growth and employment opportunities for themselves and for their children. Unemployment rate is now down from the peak of 20% in the pandemic down to 6.8. And if you look at lower income jobs, you measure that through the net subscription increase to the Provident Fund, employee Provident Fund organizations. The net subscriber growth for EPFO has been rising steadily in the last 4 years, reaching a higher level in FY23, and we expect it to continue in FY24 as well. So, in summary, investment and consumer momentum will underpin solid growth. Rural consumption is picking up, is turning around. Private sector is poised to attain strong investment growth following corporate balance sheet and bank balance sheet strength. And government has set the stage with its capital spending over the last 6 years, trebling, as I mentioned earlier. Expansion of public digital platforms and path-breaking measures such as PM Gati Shakti, National Logistics Policy, production-linked incentive schemes will boost manufacturing output. A slowdown in the global economy and trade may impact export growth of goods, but services sector exports are resilient. Prolonged geopolitical uncertainty and tightened financial conditions also pose a challenge. It is the last two bullet points are meant to tell you and share with you and reassure you that we are constantly watching the space globally and nationally as to what can go wrong and how to prepare ourselves. That is why I gave you the example of the agricultural sector, where we are making sure that there is adequate food stock available, water reservoir levels are monitored. And in the medium term also, we know that there are challenges. Energy security is important for us, and the global climate debate will have consequences for our energy security. We know that the pandemic cost years of learning losses for our children. And demographic dividends can become a demographic dividend. Our youth population can become a demographic dividend rather than a demographic deadweight, provided they are adequately skilled. Our electricity generation and distribution companies at the state level may have to become economically viable. And all levels of government, union, state, and local, have to continue to whittle down our licensing, inspection, compliance regimes so that the ease of doing business, ease of living is not just a destination, but a journey that has to continue for the next 25 years. So all these things are ongoing work in progress. We are aware that for a country with a per capita income of $2,500 today, if it has to get to a level of $10,000 per capita in the next 25 years, we have to continue to address these challenges. We cannot bask in the glory of how well we have done post-pandemic. Yes, we managed the vaccination of a large country very well. We spent prudently. We invested in capital expenditure, and we have continued to address ease of doing business and ease of living hurdles, but we need to keep at this game. And we can reassure you that the government is aware that this is a journey which has begun well, but which has to be seen through to its logical conclusion. And we are aware of that responsibility. While we are currently satisfied with the level and of the economy and the momentum, it is on an autopilot. At the same time, we don't want to tempt gods by talking about it. We just have to put our heads together and continue to make sure that the Amrit Kal sees India become a developed nation with sustainable growth and higher living standards for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nageswaran, for that excellent presentation. And we are all confident that we will all strive together to reach the Amrit Kal. We would now have the interactions. A few questions from the audience with the permission of our honored guests, please. May I start with Dr. Saurav Khemani, our committee member. Can we have a mic for Dr. Khemani, please?
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for a really wonderful insight and the journey in the last 10 years. It has really inspired all of us in the days to come. I'm sure Amrit Kal is reality and we are all going to be there. A small question. We have seen uncontrolled urbanization in many parts of the world, which really does not improve the standard of living. What is the plan to promote truly effective, productive urbanization, as by necessity, the rural population moves towards the urban centers? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Smart Cities program is one of the most, under one district, one product program, all of these things, and also the as part of the G20 initiative, preparing urban cities of tomorrow, which take into consideration both the health-related concerns that come from urban agglomerations, and also the need to develop tier 2 and tier 3 cities, the Inner Bharat program. All these things are various elements of India's approach to ensuring that urbanization, which has been the locomotive of growth for several countries, is managed in such a manner that it doesn't create a lopsided economy. So the Smart Cities program is a flagship initiative to make sure that urbanization happens in a manner that is sustainable and which does not come with the baggage that several other developed countries face, such as higher real estate cost and longer commute and transportation, but also we need to keep in mind the health implications of too much of aggregation in one center, etc. So these are all the various ways in which I think we are addressing the issue that you have raised. I don't know whether my colleague Raman Chopra has anything more to add. No, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Yes, please first introduce yourself and be precise and short so that we can have more questions.
Okay, thank you, madam. First of all, it was an excellent presentation by Dr. Nageshwar and Mr. Chopra, which is very, very relevant to the youth of the country. I belong to one of the micro small enterprises association. With me, I have Ranjan Chatterjee. I have two important questions. One is the prosperity and growth, where you have what is ease of doing business amongst the startups and mostly entrepreneurs who are qualified youth and freshers from universities and colleges. This is the one position I wanted to hear. The incubator system in the colleges and university is not working so nice at least in our state. So I want suggestions from you. And what about the SHG and the women entrepreneurs who are playing the backbone of the growth of this particular country? And lastly, the linkages between the big brothers and the micro entrepreneurs. And most important, recently Z scheme has been introduced by Prime Minister, and how it is affecting the all generations and mainly from the growth and prosperity of a beginning to the new industry. And thanks for Bharat Chamber for this type of seminar which is helping to learn many things from you. Thank you again. So my questions to be addressed.
Yeah, I think first of all, the number of startups in the country have grown from few hundreds to few tens of thousands, and that wouldn't have happened without the culture of entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem now growing roots. And last year, IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, came out with a report about the startup ecosystem no longer being confined to the big metros, but even other smaller towns, engineering colleges, management schools, etc., creating the accelerators and incubators network, connecting angel investors to startups, etc. So the culture has actually diffused from the big metros down to class B and class C towns and cities as well. But specifically with respect to the state, I'm not privy to the challenges. We'll be happy to learn and take a look at them. There will be always, as I said, there will always be issues. And that is what makes India's growth journey exciting. And we need to address them, and we are continuing to address them. For example, recently we made several relaxations over the last 3 years on the application of angel tax, for example, and the budget FY24 extends the idea of agriculture stack and brings the concepts of private capital and venture capital into the agri-processing sector as well. So it is a journey, and if there are specific issues that you have with respect to the startup ecosystem in the state, we will be happy to take a look at them.
We would now have a question from Mr. P.R. Agarwal, a former president of the chamber, also representing the brand Rupa, very popular all over the country.
My question to Mr. Nageshwaran: what are your views on promoting sustainable development, renewable energy, climate change commitments, environmental conservation, while ensuring a decade of economic growth for India? How do you plan to balance the possible trade-off between these two important visions, commitments?
Thank you. It's an important question, and the government is already balancing the two by announcing in the Prime Minister's vision, Panchamrit vision for ecologically sustainable and environmentally friendly growth rate, by saying that by the end of the decade, our installed capacity for power generation, 50% will be met by fossil fuel and 50% will be met by non-fossil fuel sources. In fact, we are already ahead of these ratios, and At the same time, we are also aware that while global warming is an important challenge, but growth and as development aspirations are equal priorities for us, and we are compared to other nations, we are trying to find the right balance between the two by encouraging specific investments in areas like green hydrogen, electric vehicle production, and also hydro power generation, and through renewable wind and solar energy generation as well. Because as a country with excessive import dependence for fossil fuels, it makes natural economic sense apart from the ecological sense to diversify our fuel and energy sources away from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels. So we are doing that. So for us, it is not an either or. It actually dovetails very nicely with our economic priorities as well. At the same time, we know that we have enough coal reserves which will power our power generation, and we cannot make the transition from coal that easily and quickly, because several countries, even in Europe last year, when they were faced with the energy shortage because of the Russian fuel not coming through, they switched back to their own coal-fired power plants. So what they did is they prioritized energy security over energy transition, and we will also therefore prioritize energy security as much as keeping a medium-term eye on energy transition. We are aware that prosperity gives us the resources to be able to invest in green growth going forward. So we don't see both these things as being in conflict with one another, but we see prosperity as giving us the resources required to make sure that the economy grows towards a greener transition in the medium to long term.
Mr. T.B. Chatterjee, please.
Sir, my name is Timi Chatterjee. I am a corporate professional. Sir, in a large democratic country, a country can prosper with three specific areas. One is legislative functions, two is executive functions, and three is judicial functions. While executive functions have been doing reasonably well, and I don't want to really comment on the legislative functions, but one area we are lagging heavily, and that is needed to reach $10 trillion economy, and that is legal reforms. So legal systems in the country, particularly in the subordinate legal areas, is absolutely zero. Commercial settlements takes more than a decade. So if you have to have the FII, FDI, you need to have a very strong legal systems, which is absolutely missing. While we get tremendous support from High Court and Supreme Court, but the legal functions in the subordinate courts is absolutely collapsed. Please look into that. While other sectors are growing really well, and you have not referred one specific area where the country is benefited, there's a very, very important area, and that is ignored, and that is remittance from the overseas Indians, and that is $107 billion. In a country of $590 billion foreign exchange, a country gets $107 billion from overseas Indians. That is a great, great support. So with this, I will request you to really look into that. And also I'll request the IT person, please see the vitality of the departmental appeals. I can tell you that particularly in the indirect taxations, the departmental appeal has no meaning. We have always to go to the tribunal or the Honorable High Court or Supreme Court to get the justice. There should be some accountability. You can always confirm the show cause notice, but you have to be accountable.
Sir, in the interest of time, so that others can also ask
these
questions,
are the three areas.
we took note of your observations about the importance of legal reforms. And do you want to add anything?
Thank you, sir.
On the issue of litigation, I would just comment that in this year's finance bill itself, budget speech of the finance minister, it was clear the issue was highlighted, and in fact 100 officers have been posted as Joint Commissioner Appeals to dispose of small appeals. That is because government is sensitive towards the issue of pendency of litigation, and that is why specific provision has been made in the budget itself. Thank you.
So, yeah.
There is a lady who wants to ask a question. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shivani Binjrajka. We are one of the leading toy manufacturers in Eastern India. So my question is to you. It is believed that India will become the third largest economy by 2027, surpassing Japan and Germany. So how will this economic growth reduce poverty and improve the standard of living for the people? And my second question is, how unskilled labor, underprivileged women help towards this economic growth?
Economic growth doesn't happen in a vacuum, because growth requires investment. Investment in turn requires humans to work there, and that creates income growth. That is how the virtuous cycle happens. And when several countries, if you go by the history of their economic transformation, growth does contribute to improved living standards. And we have seen in our own country, India's nominal GDP was $280 billion in 1993. In 2023, it is $3.4 trillion. And despite the rupee depreciating from 16 or 30 rupees all the way to 80, we have achieved a 10-fold growth in nominal GDP, resulting in people's per capita income rising from a few $100s to $2,500. And you see that in the number of taxpayers increasing even at the low income level, etc., because more people are earning enough to come into the tax net. And the previous gentleman referred to the fact that remittances by Indians abroad are about $107 billion, etc. So you are seeing that in the data, economic growth translates into higher living standards and higher employment opportunities. And last decade, because of the balance sheet issues, this did not happen as strongly as we would have liked, but this decade is going to compensate for that. That is how our ranking going up is an incidental consequence of higher living standards for our people.
We were having somebody from the center asking. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself and be very short and precise.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, sir, I'm Vikas Chaudhary, I'm into business consultancy. Thank you, sir, for such a crisp and informative presentation. Sir, there's no second doubt that the decade belongs to India, and growth of India will continue to boost by internal consumption. The GDP growth of 6.5 is more or less a surety. However, the concern being faced by most of the MSME, especially into manufacturing, is given the gap between large corporates and organized corporates as compared to MSME. How do we plan to address this? Thank you.
So, thank you for the question. That the MSME sector has been receiving important attention from the government. The entire emergency credit line guarantee scheme initiative during the pandemic year was meant to make sure that the MSMEs did not suffer disproportionately. I spoke about the Udyam portal registration. I spoke about the Mudra loan schemes and the Swanidhi loan schemes. All these things, and also government liberalized and changed the classification and threshold norms for MSMEs so that they don't have to be afraid of growth and giving up some of the benefits they enjoy depending on the classification of micro or small or medium. In fact, even if they graduate to the next higher category from micro to small or small to medium, for the next 3 years they can actually enjoy some of the facilities they used to enjoy in their previous categorization. So all these things have been done in the last 2-3 years to make sure that the MSME sector remains an important contributor. The Open Network Digital Commerce Initiative, Open Credit Enablement Network, OCEN and ONDC, as well as the Udyam portal combined together are not only improving market access but also giving them financial access. So they can use the GST invoices to actually as a collateral to get working capital facility. And then the government also has been progressively tightening and making it mandatory for large corporations to pay their MSME suppliers on time, both in the public sector and the private sector. And that is where I would even request many of the private sector large players here to think about the ways in which they can contribute to this by ensuring that they pay their MSME suppliers on time, because it is not just a government initiative, but it's also a private sector responsibility. So over the last 8 to 9 years, MSME sector has received consistent attention, and all the various initiatives I just now mentioned are demonstrations of the government's commitment to this sector, because we understand that a strong MSME sector is the backbone of economic development, as happened in Japan, Germany, and Switzerland, etc. And we are quite committed to emulating that and replicating India's own version of MSME sector as a vibrant backbone of economic growth.
Mr. Sunil Surana.
Just on the MSME payments, in fact, this time we've actually legislated that. If a payment is not made to an MSME, that expense is not debitable in the accounts. That is a basic hardcore thing which has been legislated towards the benefit of the MSMEs. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Sunil Surana. At the outset, I would like to thank Rishi for organizing this lovely interactive session. And sir, it was a wonderful deliberation by you, sir, highlighting the initiatives of the Modi government, and lovely work is being done by your team. And sir, I want to highlight something from the direct taxes front. Not only direct taxes, but in general, like I've seen that the laws are being drafted in such a manner that it leads to a number of litigations. So don't you think that it's a hindrance to the ease of doing business? And number two, the compliances burden, I feel has risen substantially. Whereas the large corporates, they have to keep a huge department, especially for handling the various compliances. So what are your views on this? And I do appreciate the initiatives like demonetization, faceless assessment scheme, which have come up and which have really helped us a lot. But at the same time, there are certain, these two things are coming as a hindrance. So your views, sir.
As and when a compliance issue is raised to the ministry or the board that this is coming in way of ease of doing business, we've been handling it. We've been monitoring it. We are sensitive to any specific suggestions on compliance issues being faced by corporates. I would suggest that specific issues may be brought to the knowledge of the board that this is causing a problem. Because from our end, we have no intention of enhancing any compliance burden on the entity. The compliance, if it increases, is only to promote a voluntary compliance from your side, so that at the end of 2 years or 3 years, you may not end up doing something which is not intended. The return form, the common return form, all are initiatives so as to promote better data compliance, better data points coming to the department from your side, and they being rest there itself. Thank you.
There's a lady behind in the last rows, I suppose, who would like to ask a question. She's been waiting for quite long. Is there somebody who wanted to ask a question? Yeah, please.
Okay, my name is Jimli Ghosh. As per ILO's data, now persistence of informal sector in India is over 90%. I just wanted to know how our growth targets would comply with that.
That's an outdated number, because that was based on 2011-12 statistic, and depending on which metric you choose, the size of the informal sector actually is far lower. Even way back in 2018 January, when my predecessor to the predecessor, Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, when his economic survey in January 2018 actually put the size of the Indian formal economy at more than 60%. That was just within 6 months after the GST came out. And today, when in my remarks, I also mentioned that even a magazine like The Economist is saying that in a few years' time, India will not have informal enterprises because everybody would have formalized. And that is why I presented information on the Udyam portal, how much of registration is happening. In the last 2 years, the registration of the Udyam portal is far higher than what it was in the previous 15 years for MSME sector. The moment you are registered in the Udyam portal, you actually become a formal enterprise because you get access to finance, you get access to markets. So we cannot continue to harp on a statistic that is outdated, more than 12 years old, without taking into consideration the developments that have happened on the ground, which is backed up by data as well. So I think we should not keep repeating this 90% number when we know fully well that the facts speak otherwise. Thank you.
Mr. D.B. Desai.
Good afternoon. It has been a pleasure for Calcutta to hear the two great visionaries yesterday and today. So I have a specific recommendation and request on this new manufacturing company provisions which are there in Income Tax Act. Sir, as you will appreciate, the objective of fiscal legislation is to eliminate the root cause of litigation, widen the tax base, and give clarity to the taxpayer. So these new tax provisions of 115 BAB are extremely critical in this Amrit Kal when we are looking at the Indian economy to be the leading economy in the world. So I suggest three specific things, sir. First, in relation to international transaction with associated enterprises, we have provisions of advanced pricing agreement. This provision, sir, our experience has been so refreshing that whenever we have APA, we have zero tax litigation with the TP authorities, which otherwise are a nightmare for the SSAs. So it has been a very, very refreshing experience. These new manufacturing companies, sir, are also subjected to domestic transfer price, beside the tax holidays. So the undertakings which are eligible for tax holiday and this new manufacturing company, which are primarily subjected to domestic transfer pricing, if we have the advanced pricing agreement provisions extended to them, we will eliminate root cause of future litigation. One. Secondly, there could be cases where people could get away with a lower base they adopt and paying less tax. If we go to APA, the right base will be decided because senior most officials of the government of India are looking into the APA, and it will add to the widening of the tax base and also certainty for the taxpayer. So this is one recommendation, sir, you may please consider. The second aspect is that manufacturing and making in India is going to be extremely critical for next decade or two till we reach 2047, the reckoning moment. So the date for the new manufacturing company of 31st March 24 had a purpose initially from 22, we got 23, 24. But possibly, sir, this date needs to be extended by a longer period. If we give it an open-ended period, people will postpone the decision. So possibly we could extend the date by, say, 1 year for investment up to 100 crore or a threshold, maybe 2 to 3 years for maybe up to 500 crore, maybe higher investment, it could be a longer period for 5 years. So people who want to take decisions of large investment, they cannot do, sir, in 1 year period. So if we have a larger time, then that could be considered. Again, that would give certainty and clarity. Thank you.
First of all, thanks a lot on the good words on APA. APA was always intended to be a non-litigated solution which was available to the assessee beforehand itself, before entering into the transaction, just after entering into the transaction, that he would not be required to answer on that, on a transfer pricing post the transaction. So APA's program has been going on well, and it has really picked up in the last year or so. As far as the other two suggestions you are putting forth, yes, they can be considered, but it is not for me to decide or not decide on those. I would suggest that you give a written submission in detail on the two suggestions you are specifically making, so that we can discuss them during the budget discussions next time. Thank you.
May we have the gentleman in the front row, please? Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is C.A. Pawan Kumar Patodia. I came slightly late, so I do not know whether you have covered this in your speech or not. Just a small question, sir. I'm sure the Amrit Kal is going to be there, and all those numbers which you gave, there's no doubt in anybody's mind over here. We are the youngest population. I have just one question. The way ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google are coming, and the news we are hearing in the newspaper and other platforms that 28% jobs will be eradicated, 46% jobs will be eradicated. In an economy like India, where we are seeing a young population coming forward, how do we feel that we are going to tackle this? Thank you.
It is a valid concern that you have raised. It is something that the world will be finding answers as we go along, because this is the beginning. But at this point, it can also be a positive source of growth for a country like India, because what happens is, if these sources of artificial intelligence improve productivity of the workers, and companies therefore can do with, let's say, assigning less number of people to a given project than they used to do earlier, because they can substitute it with these engines, it also means that they can take on far more projects than they were able to do earlier. So in that sense, it need not be a lose proposition. It can be a win-win proposition, provided we are able to upskill and make our people take advantage of what these tools and new interventions and innovations enable us to do so. So given our growth and given the fact that we are still climbing from lower middle income to middle income, it actually opens up capacity and potential for our own IT-enabled enterprises, etc., to take on more assignments and more projects. So it can be therefore employment generating rather than employment reducing at this point. But over a point in time, over a longer period, yes, it may have implications for certain industries and job creation. So it is a multi-pronged, multi-year approach we need to do to harness its benefits and limit the negative impacts it has got. It will be facile and presumptuous on my part to try and come up with answers right now on the spot, except to tell you that we are completely aware of the issues that you are raising. Thank you.
The last question for the afternoon.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Sir, I'm Naresh Kothari from NG Brothers. We are EPC contractors, MSME EPC contractors doing branding works. Government recently introduced Vivad Se Viswas for MSME sector for the issues during the COVID period. Under Vivad Se Viswas scheme, MSME will promise that liquidating damages will be refunded. The spirit was to give relief to the MSME for delay of supply and services provided in the hard times of COVID-19. We are majorly working with oil and gas companies. In oil and gas companies, in some of the contracts it is written, in some of the contracts of some companies it is written liquidating damages for delay. In others it is written, I'm naming the company, it's the biggest OMC of India, IOC. They have written in all their contracts price adjustment for delay. Now what happens when recently we sought clarifications from Ministry of Finance. They told us that this liquidating damages does not cover price adjustment for delay. So the spirit of the scheme was to benefit or give relief for the delays or whatever work was done during that period of time. With a change in jargon, a new use of a word, the spirit is getting diluted. We are not getting benefit out of this. This needs to be taken care of. Thousands and thousands crore rupees of MSME will not be paid by that particular company just because they have used a more technical word. But at the end of that word, they also write for delay. I'm putting this for the Ministry of Finance and also for the Chief Economic Advisor to take care of this. And I like you to say something about this. It involves huge amount.
Sir has already conveyed the policy of the government is to assist and aid the MSMEs, and that is the concept behind the policy. these are specific issues relating to wording of contracts between an MSME and its the corporate entity. So I suggest that you give a detailed write-up, follow it up with a mail to the Finance Ministry, so we can look into it whether it is a wording issue or a substantive issue. If it is a wording issue only, naturally it can be resolved and covered. But if it is a substantive issue between you and your corporate entity, then it has to be resolved there itself. But I would suggest that you give a write-up on this to the Finance Ministry so that we can look into it. That's about it. Thank you.
We've already announced the last question, so Sir has agreed to take one more question. Dibinduda, please go ahead.
So I'm from PTI. So yesterday the monetary policy meeting has announced that the GDP growth focus for the current fiscal will be around 6.5%. So what is the view, what is the focus from the government side?
Forecast on the government side was given in the economic survey, it is 6.5%, and both the RBI and the Ministry of Finance now believe 6.5% is the estimated growth for FY24, and the risks to this estimate are evenly balanced. That is also the position of the Government of India. Therefore, in that sense, the Ministry of Finance and RBI are on the same page with respect to the growth estimate for FY24 and also on the balance of risks around this number. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nageshwaran, for bearing so much with us for the questions session. Before I request Mr. Bagri to deliver the vote of thanks, we would like to present small mementos as a token of our appreciation to our honored guests. May I request Mr. Harimohan Bangar to present the memento to Dr. Nageshwaran, please. Sir, it has your photograph inscribed, and we hope and expect that you will remember this session. May I request Mr. Rajkumar Agrawal, Vice President of the Chamber, to hand over the memento to Mr. Raman Chopra. Thank you, Mr. Agrawal. May I request now Mr. Rishi Bagri, Chairman, the Program Subcommittee of Bharat Chamber of Commerce, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Dr. Nageshwaran, Sri Chopra ji, Sri Bangar ji, members of chambers, guests and friends. At the very end of the exclusive session entitled The Decade of India's Growth and Prosperity, it is my pleasure and privilege to propose a hearty vote of thanks to all our honored guests. We are grateful to you, Dr. Nageshwaran ji, our guest in chief, for sparing some of your valuable time to share your thoughts, the detail of economic prosperity of the Indian economy highlighted by you, and have made us very proud. I wish to now thank Sri Chopra ji, our guest of honor, for making it convenient to grace the session and highlighting the current and future perspective of fueling our economic growth. My special thanks to Sri H.M. Bangar ji, former President of Chambers and Chamber and Chairman Sri Cement Limited, for his illuminating observation today. I have to thank you specifically for your initiative in organizing this educative session. My thanks are also due to the representative of the media for their presence and for this particular session. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the esteemed dignitaries, members of the chambers, for making it convenient to attend the exclusive session. With these words, I request you all to join me in carrying a hearty vote of thanks to Dr. Nageshwaran and Sri Chopra ji with appreciative acclamation. Thank you all.
Media bite deve?
Let's take the group photo first.
Nothing new.
Sir, you can have your seat here and we will come here.
Yeah.
You can be seated. বেশি বিরক্ত করবেন না।
So regarding artificial intelligence that you have mentioned in your presentation somewhere, the service sector, the Indian service sector, and how is AI going to affect in the years ahead? If you may elaborate, and if there are any numbers. Yeah, is it going to affect? I don't have any more to say.
How do you see the economy and GDP for financial year 23 in the midst of the threat of a slowdown in the world? So the second is, do you think RBI will be under pressure to raise the rate of if the Fed
So the state debts, how serious is the concern of the state debts?
state governments are additional spending allowance. So it is overall general government debt is something that the Indian Union and the state India's general government debt, includes union and state government, was 81% of GDP in 2005. Now it is 80%. So it has not worsened. In fact, several other countries where it has gone up by more than 20 percentage points. So the last does the timing of the recall of 2000 notes by the government have something to do with the keeping rates? Does the timing of the recall of 2000 notes by the government have something to do with keeping rates high?
So the just last one, the financial discipline, to curtail, are the freebies that the states are offering and going overboard to spend on freebies. Is there something that the financial discipline should be?